Greetings, my internet friends. Welcome to Walking and Talking, the show in which I walk and talk. I'll just start off by saying that I feel stupid. Still. I'm embarrassed. I don't know what to say. Maybe I can muster some willpower to direct our experience here into one that's not one of humiliation. I guess that would imply that I'm rejecting humiliation as a valid, acceptable experience. Even though I know I'm pretty much always humiliated for a while, especially at the beginning. I go through a stage of humiliation that kind of tears me apart a little bit, and then through prolonged exposure I feel opened up somehow, the cobwebs swept out, and then I feel as if then I'm projecting that at some point I'll feel more connected to the living edge of my being or something like that, and maybe you will too, and maybe the abjectness of this type of interaction will either become a moot point or somehow disappear or fade into the background or something like that, and maybe some form of value gets discovered or something like that, or not so much discovered as at least kind of temporarily, some form of value will be temporarily erected as a type of justification, a type of rationale in order to somehow resolve our cognitive dissonance surrounding this seemingly fucked up interaction that you and I are having. Like, what the fuck is this? Just talking for 4 hours. What the hell? This is bullshit. And everything about it. Especially this. Everything that seems to present as some aspect of identity coming up to you know, prove something. Some identity appearing to disavow its past self or something like that. Something appearing and making distinctions between what's shitty and what might be good, but mainly just kind of decrying everything as fake. And then, you know, that on a continuing self-reflexive cycle of continuing to decry each moment of self appearing as an agent, you know? It's like, who the fuck is talking here? And whoever it is, in the next moment, the person who's talking is gonna disavow any identification with everything that's been said. Gonna continually disavow identification with any perspective. Like this continual suspicion of the feeling of agency, or maybe it's like the assumption of agency, but then again, still, it's as if some agent wants to do something, wants to disidentify with something particular. But needs to exercise some form of agency to make that happen, it would seem. Exercising effort. To get to some higher perspective. Apparently. Through continually disidentifying, disavowing. But continuing to feel totally absurd. Isn't this just another angle? Aren't I just angling for a niche? Give me my damn niche in the world so I can distinguish myself. What the fuck is this? Inner monologue. Why do you give a shit? Why would you? Anyhow, there's people. Hold your horses. Hello. I'm having trouble reconciling. why I'm doing this. And there's this somewhat exasperated energy that feels disequilibrious somehow. Some kind of exasperated drive towards something that feels more equilibrious, yet just so confused. What the fuck am I doing? I'm thinking about the world and my place in it, and feeling like I just keep thinking that I've screwed up, but or that I'm just totally dysfunctional. And yet, in the back of my mind, I still understand that that's kind of a very relativistic way of thinking about it that depends on, you know, particular value system. Maybe even the hegemonic value system. Fuck. And then I'm like, I feel like such a fucking asshole, because it's like I have to conjure up some special absence of value systems in order to rationalize my existence in the world. God damn it. This is so dysfunctional. I'm so fucked. I'm such a piece of shit. God damn it. And yet I'm also aware that this perspective will change, that I'm having, that usually it seems like the opposite comes about, meaning I'm like aware that I am having the very real feeling experience of feeling like a fucking idiot. And at the same time, in the back of my head, forecasting that perspective will change and maybe even reverse somehow, and I'll feel like a fucking genius, or something like that, or I'll feel like I've gained perspective and insight through having gone through this process. You know, I'm just like pulling from past experiences. I'm just pulling from memory to make this prediction. Which means I'm still just kind of dealing with the familiar. I'm still kind of just doing what I've done dozens of times. I'm well within the safety net. I keep grasping towards a rationale for what I'm doing, like a moral reason. Something like it's as if it's part of a moral program to put long, barely watchable, you know, maybe kind of unwatchable content on YouTube in an arena where the viewer is constantly having the lower angels of their nature stimulated and their attention scrambled by the stupidest fucking shit. The race to the bottom of the barrel. God fucking damn it. God fucking damn it. You know, I'm trying to rationalize myself. I'm trying to place myself in a do-good position so I can ease some of my cognitive dissonance and think that I'm doing something good in the world. Or at least feel like that temporarily. By telling myself that I'm offering you an alternative, something that's really fucking boring and difficult, but that I'm like imagining will pay off somehow later in the episode. Like some kind of transitional exercise for your attention, though. But it's all bullshit. I know it's all bullshit. Because it can go the other way, too, you know? This could also just be an unhealthy surrogate friendship for you that's, you know, very mediated and unidirectional, and so it's not a real friendship. It's just a simulated person talking, and maybe in some way you've made me a friend, or I'm in some way feeling I'm some simulacrum of a friend that can inadequately fill a hole. But which might be, you know, it's quite possible that this is just serving to get you by without having to form real in-person relationships, or to think for yourself, or to be alone with your own inner monologue. I hate all this moralizing, to be honest. I think it's stupid. Either the right or wrong part of it. I don't know. But yet I feel like it's inevitable not to think about those things. It's impossible not to go through that. even though I can remember quite clearly in walking and talking the experience of seeming to have transcended morality, or to see through it, to stop this right or wrong stuff. Where it's like, there's not this like heavy moral question about what we're doing and how we're spending our time. But, you know, I'm projecting into some other mental space right now. I feel like I want to, I have the suspicion that it's would be possible to direct effort towards putting myself, and by extension you, in into kind of a less kind of like self-antagonizing position that is not so emotionally twisted up into these polarities. That it seems, you know, it seems like I'm just reifying stuff via my emotional reactivity. You know what I'm saying? But then I also, at the same time, I feel like suspect of the I feel suspicious of the kind of directive towards like presence or whatever it is, you know, relaxing and paying attention to my breath, and you know, like exercising presence as like I feel suspicious of the supposed agent that can become more present by its will. You know, it feels kind of contradictory or something like that, like it's still setting up a dichotomy between emotionally reactive and emotionally flat and or calm and receptive. But I suppose it remains true that it's like I seem to be that I do seem to be unnecessarily emotionally reactive. That it does seem like I can actually or even that, you know, attention seems to like be going more towards the body and becoming a little bit more cognizant of what is it, proprioceptive sense, you know, like just the sense of the sense of my physical body, attention going more towards that, and as attention goes towards it, the distinct sense of being embodied starts to dissipate a little, and it's like the tension, the physiological tension relaxes a bit, and the emotional sense of being this individual that needs to do something and do something right and get things right relaxes. That reactivity that needs to like immediately solve something, or that needs to know that it's on the right track or something like that, relaxes some, and in some sense relaxes into the confusion, to where the confusion is felt not so much as this negative thing, and as such the appropriate word maybe changes into like openness or something. Openness to experience, openness to not knowing what is going on at all, and like a relaxation of this kind of reifying action of self-reproachment, you know, the constant urge towards disavowal of the immediately prior self relaxes, because, and then with that it's like the identification with the continual identification with like the now self that needs to like assert itself over by disavowing the immediately past self. That relaxes. And even the story of the past and present and future self, they kind of like that story loses a bit of its tension, its narrative tension, and becomes more permeable and becomes more apparent as a story. And that's kind of in conjunction with the dissipation of linear time as this felt experience. Like with the sort of unwinding of the emotional reactivity, it's like the this felt sense of time passing loosens its grip, an identification loosens up its stranglehold. And but then there's still it's not like there's any rest exactly. In some sense there's like, you could say, some relative state of ease, but that truly is only relative to its perceived opposite of the state of distress, which, you know, I'm thinking about, I have an idea in my mind of a state of distress that I'm associating with the recent past, that is merely a few minutes ago, and I'm remembering that state of, what did I call it? Like just like a mild desperation to figure out what I'm doing and making sure that I'm on the right track, that I'm not doing something bad or wasting my time or wasting your time. This mildly desperate need to arrive intellectually at some place of like where the mind can feel assured that it's moral and it's correct. That it's actualizing its highest values, etc. And so, like, if we continue to erect that dichotomy in our mind, that polarity between, say, that state of emotional reactivity that we're thinking about, that I'm thinking about, drawn from memory, and how we are casting the present experience as a relative ease or a relative relaxation of all of those tensions, then that affords us this opportunity to tell a story about what's going on right now as being like a restful state, but that wouldn't really be true. Because it's not as if all of the problems being posited by an emotionally reactive state, or a more polarized, a more dualistic state of mind, have been at all resolved or answered. It's simply that all those problems continue. They're just continuing. They're just continuing to be problems, and maybe the kind of topological texture of the state of problematicness, we could say has shifted a little bit, but it's in fact not fundamentally different. There's in fact no fundamental change from, what we're positing as then and now, or the future. I mean, if anything, you could just say that we've gone, you could say that we've just gone farther into it, farther into that problem, the problem of what the fuck am I doing, which kind of closely relates to the questions of who am I, what is to be done. What's the right thing to do? What do I do with this life? My brief time here in the world. My brief seeming time, etc. We've just, we're just, that's all still a giant problem. In fact, it's like basically that problem is basically what existence is. But it keeps going, It's like, it's not that the dissipation of time brings us to a stasis. It's actually kind of, I guess I would say, it's like seeing time more clearly as being the expression of the incompleteness of reality. Hello. Hi. This is essentially the same thing that I get at every single walking and talking, I think. That to say something like the times when I feel the most aligned with what would appear from the outside to be truth are the times when I feel the most clearly the absence or the incompleteness of something like truth. Hi. or that I like. The times when I feel the most disillusioned are the times when I feel the most that everything is illusory, that there's only illusion, that there's essentially a void at the center. That truth is essentially a void, and the process of knowing the truth is, in fact, the attempt to court the void. To, defy gravity, as it were, and to float towards the void. But it's not like you can ever reach it, It's not like you can reach the center of it. But at the same time, we can equally say that that's what everything is all along. That all the illusion, as it were, with, I'm putting scare quotes around the illusion because it's, in fact, it is an illusion that any illusion arises at all. And in fact, there is no illusion. There's no illusion as distinct from reality, And so I maintain what I said right at the beginning, that there's not anything to learn here or to be gained. You can seem to learn something in context that is in relation to boundaries, in relation to limits. But it's like the idea of learning is in a way the same as like as cutting something off. Like whatever there would seem to be gained is like as much as lost, in that it's always a rearrangement. I mean, some people might object and say that I might frame things as, no, there is in fact a hierarchy of knowledge or truth, and that certain knowledge helps the individual more, that is more advantageous to a person than its absence, than to lack that knowledge. Or someone might say that actually there is effectively an objective world as evidenced by intersubjective experience and agreement on things. But I think that I would also say that the appearance of learning or to add to oneself knowledge, or to add intellect to oneself, or add, enlightenment, or really anything, perceived as a gain to oneself, is equally a reformulation of identity. A reformulation of identification, a different shape of identification, a different shape of separation, where there's always as much lost as there is gained. As in, as much as you can say that you saw the light with regard to anything, it's like it's a disavowal of the prior self who did the light seeing, the prior self who was illusioned, that became supposedly disillusioned. That self died away, That self is now effectively disavowed, to the extent that we maintain the story of having seen the light, of having become enlightened in some respect, in any way, even just having learned something, or telling the story that we got closer to the truth, or we became more moral. We became better in some way. All that stuff is still a story that's dependent on some kind of cordoned off segment of fragmentary view of reality. It's totally dependent on fragmentation of reality. I'm serious about it. I mean it, like, in a real sense. Hello. That even down to the act of being a person, of understanding ourselves as an individual in the world, requires the constant maintenance of this intricate conceptual framework that sees things as linear time, moving from past to future, of being localized spatially, in opposition to the rest of the world. And then of all the distinctions of what constitutes the self and what constitutes the other. All of that has to be actively maintained. But it's also fine. It's because it's like, it's fine that happens, because at the same time that doesn't even occur. Or another way of saying it is that all of that is still, I guess we could say, unity appearing as that, unity appearing as separation. Like the apparent localization of your individual consciousness, you know, the appearance that your consciousness is located in a particular place as opposed to the rest of the world, and as opposed to other consciousnesses. That is just what's the word to say it? That consciousness is in fact everywhere, or that it is in fact locationless. But it is like this is the locationless appearing as localization, or, you know, this is the one appearing as many, but as maybe we've talked about before in Walking and Talking, and maybe we'll ramble about more, that saying the one is essentially the same as saying nothing. But I feel tired of talking about that. it's almost like the sort of paradoxical impossibility of unity expresses itself as separation and individuation. And it's the same with time. It's like the paradoxical impossibility of the absence of time appearing, like expressing itself as the illusory appearance of time, of, you know, this sort of like appearance of reality being like spread out over time, if you will. And being spread out over space. And it's like it's like there's a codependency on those two illusions, or perceptions. There's perceptions of reality being distributed temporally and spatially. There's a codependence between that perception and the perception of being an individual. There's like a symmetry between them, or an isomorphism. There's a perfect isomorphism between the dual perceptions of the way reality is and being a person, you know, or just an individual, a being, a particular, having a particular perspective. It's in fact kind of like there's a generalized and almost nearly fundamental action of othering always happening. Or always seeming to happen, but it's just all it is. Is that othering is kind of like the way that unity would have to express. It can only kind of express by becoming its opposite, which I know sounds crazy, and it is. It's like completely paradoxical. It's as if like it's as if the basis of reality is a fundamental impossibility, but in fact so impossible that the word fundamental is not really appropriate. That there's in fact no fundamentality. That there's only kind of impossibility. Or paradox, if you want. Which, you know, isn't isn't anything fundamental at all. There's no there's no firm ground. There's no direction, and this, it goes, that kind of like pulls the rug out from everything continuously forever, including itself, you know? It's like the rug being pulled out, but there's not, there isn't anything, there never was a rug. Or that, you know, anything that appeared to be a rug was just an expression of the profound absence of rug. Maybe not a great analogy. But that everything that would appear as secure or firm or solid or reliable or safe is also a limitation, is also a boundary being set. It's also it's also a cordoning off of reality. That's always conditional and temporary, temporally and spatially bounded. Which is just another way of saying that it's just a slice in the pie, but it doesn't change the pie. But the pie is so expansive and inclusive that it includes absolutely everything, which makes even the conception of pie meaningless. You know, it's like the concept that, like, the even the concept of reality is meaningless. It's kind of a pointer towards something that can never be arrived at or grasped. Because it, by definition, signifies everything that, and must include that which perceives reality in it, you know. There can't be, by definition, anything outside of reality. So reality, as a term, at least as I'm defining it here, includes anything like consciousness or experience or a witness or something. And so it's definitionally so encompassing that it kind of vitiates itself. Because there's no longer any two entities between which there can be something like meaning, between which there can be something like existence. Like the whole position of being able to know something, or thinking that it is possible to know something. The position itself is based upon overlooking something. It's based upon missing something. The position of looking. The position of knowing. Suggests a direction, suggests a perspective that is looking in one direction and necessarily away from the other direction. The notion of perspective necessitates not seeing something. It necessitates missing something. Namely, it's like to look in a direction, to have orientation, to be oriented in a direction would always require being oriented away from something. Whatever is behind your perspective, i.e., that which would be considered the self, must be missed, has to be looked away from necessarily in order to look at something, at a supposed objective world, to have the orientation that there's knowledge possible. Necessitates a knower and a known, which, to take the part of the knower means you have to miss, that which knows. Hello. But there isn't any better alternative, actually. There isn't any, you know, it would seem that one could stop orienting oneself. One could end the search. One could end the search for knowledge of any sort and become orientationless, so to speak, and therefore kind of cease the duality. But it's pretty much the same as the cessation of existence, you know? It's like the cessation of duality is the cessation of existence, and that itself is paradoxical. Because you can't actually like come into non-existence, to unreality, you know? No observer, nothing objective nor subjective can be a part of non-existence, you know? And yet, at the same time, that's what it is. At the same time, it all is. It's like a giant non-answer. And then, so like, right now I feel like there's, you know, in a relative way of speaking, a profound sense to the experience of being profoundly dysfunctional. That there's like a perfect reason for this experience of being a fucking idiot, of being in the wrong, of feeling like you're a fuck up who is just at odds with the real world or something, you know? It's like I expressed a lot in the beginning of this video, this experience of feeling this intense dissonance between like my self-conception and the world, where it's like I feel this desperation and frustration in relationship to myself and to the world. Like it just kind of pervades both at the same time. But in a sense, it kind of like makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense if you know, it's paradox swallowing everything, you know? Like of there being no basis, there being no ground. There being no possibility even for something like a real direction. Or any direction necessitating a lapse in seeing, any direction necessitating a blind spot. Necessitating a lack or fault. Any orientation towards the true or good or beautiful, like always indicating, behind the dividing line between self and other. A blind spot, something missing, a problem, a mistake. But that quality, just being just extending all the way down. It's like people it's like new atheists laugh at, the turtles all the way down analogy, but and I recognize, the turtles all the way down as a useful kind of anecdote or allegory or something for illustrating a lack of logic or lack of rigor or something between that would seem to underlie particular worldviews, particular metaphysical worldviews, including creationism, etc. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think that there's actually a fundamentally more coherent worldview. Or, maybe it can be said that there's some relativistic hierarchy when, it's possible to say that it's sort of possible to say that, like, to some degree, that there seems to be sort of like a leading edge of metaphysics or something that would seem to give a picture of reality that is that holds up intersubjectively more than metaphysics of yore. Maybe. In a certain limited way of thinking. But in fact, it's like, even at the so-called leading edge of cosmology or physics, the apparently hardest sciences. At their leading edge, when they, get towards a metaphysics, towards an explanation of everything, a theory of everything, what is, there's still just as much paradox, in fact. There's just as much paradox as turtles all the way down. When you get into quantum mechanics and the implication of the observer in the existence of reality, that is, the implication of subjectivity in objectivity, and even like physical reality as such being kind of revealed to be more fundamentally relational than to have, inherent independent existence. When you get to the level of subatomic particles, and like read Carlo Rovelli for a more thorough examination of this end of physics, of quantum mechanics and quantum gravity. Being like ostensibly being ostensibly, the leading edge of the hard sciences. Having as much credibility as anything in our society could have. Having as much of seeming objectivity as anything could have. And it just gets into this trippiness, But don't misunderstand me, and don't get me wrong. Don't kind of like mistake me for advocating for something like social relativism, that as having usurped science or something. You can't just like take this paradox as a confirmation of. You can't just take this as confirmation and evidence of your viewpoint of all of science as being merely like a white male oppressive ideology that and then like the real truth is like the real truth is represented by some historically marginalized group or something like that. That's just as much of obfuscation of things and attempting to like firm up a viewpoint over others. It's like that stuff is just as much of attempting to like solidify identity by solidifying this perspective over others and to like form a hard basis that feels like security, and it's also that's also like very much bound up in economic and social status types of security. The motivation to expound these like social relativist explanations for all other fields, these social relativist attacks on all other fields of knowledge. It's like it's still just the same kind of thing happening of strongly forming an orientation that has to miss itself, that has to miss the knower, that has to overlook the problem of the knower in order to know something. Because I'm in fact saying that the unknowing engulfs absolutely everything, including anything that would appear here as information, is still continuing the problem. It's still continuing, because how could it not, Like, this is all still, everything that's being said here is still a problem, and is still wrong, and is still oriented. So there's still this paradox ever present here, in that anything that would appear to be something like knowledge or insight or broadened perspective, or anything even appearing as like universalist or God, anything that would seem to be really real, and anything occurring here that would seem to be understanding, is also just as wrong as anything else. It's as conditional, as subjective, like as kind of a perspective provided for by context and conditionality. It would, I think, yeah. I mean, it's not like I'm even able to think like this amidst more ordinary life circumstances, It requires this particular practice of remove or something, or just like this particular practice of setting specific parameters upon experience in order to talk this way. And those parameters are just as conditional as anything else, and they're temporally and spatially as bounded as anything else you could say, and will end, and other sort of like parameters of reality will arise that create reality in a way that's totally contradictory to everything being said here. you know, merely that will eventually, you know, appear with, you know, quotation marks around it to have the limitations on our corporeal existence or even conceptual existence imposed upon our being, and we'll have to do things like eat and sleep and stuff. And we'll kind of like necessarily occupy other perspectives in which there's a relatively where there's this like real objective. There's where there's a real objective world perceived by a subject, because that there's an objective for that subject. There's an objective of maintaining that subjectivity that mandates the eating of food and the maintenance of the equilibrium of the corpus, even though we're also right now like kind of observing a relative truth of the absence of self and other. And we're observing, you know, even if you follow the most rigorous logic and science and cross-reference with seemingly your most direct perception of your immediate experience, even, you know, it's like taking the most rigorously vetted of your intersubjective conceptual reality and cross-referencing it with the most solid seeming information presented by your sensory apparati. You know, you're not gonna wind up with any solid picture of the self or the world. You know, you're not gonna wind up on any solid ground of existing. You know, you're not going to be able to hammer it down. Yet, at the same time, it's also going to be the case that like I'm hungry, you know, or like my body compels me to rest, and certain things need to be done. Like there's still like, you know, there's no like getting away from it. There's no escape. But it's paradoxical and compatible. Like being individuated and separated weirdly and paradoxically enough is also just perfectly compatible with the ultimate absence of anything, the ultimate absence of subjectivity or objectivity. The apparent distinction is not only just compatible with the absence of distinction, the absence of separation, they kind of include each other. They are actually expressions of each other. Hello.
How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Doing alright.
Yeah. Are you on a through hike?
Yep. Doing a flip-flop out of Harper's Ferry.
Awesome. I mean, like, yeah, just take for instance, like, what would seem to be, like some kind of hard edge of existing as a self, namely, like the apparent reality of the body, the separation between the body and not the body, and this seemingly incontrovertible fact of that if you hit your finger with a hammer it hurts, but if you hit the table with a hammer it doesn't hurt. And that being just a fundamental difference as far as the consciousness and the subjectivity is concerned. And, you know, look at the very natural avoidance of pain. And the avoidance of pain and discomfort kind of dictating certain parameters on behavior, you know. It's like you don't step in front of traffic, etc., etc. And so it's like there is, in that sense, there's kind of a gravity towards equilibrium of the body, where, you know, there's a pull towards, there's a push away from pain and discomfort and towards, you know, feeling relatively comfortable in one's body. That's like, you know, what we all want. But also perhaps observe that that state of corporal equilibrium, that is like the absence of pain and discomfort, could also be interpreted as the absence of particular signals that strongly signify or indicate the separation of body and other. That is, like when certain things go awry and you stub your toe or whatever, it's like you're presented with this version of reality in which your toe is very different from the thing that you stubbed it on, and you have to remain kind of corporally within this boundary so you don't experience that pain of like really having the presence of your toe announced to yourself, like having the reality of the difference of your toe being brought to bear on your attention. And so the opposite of that is like the experience of relative equilibrium. I mean, and I say relative because absolute perfect equilibrium would kind of mean death in a sense, but it's like relative equilibrium. Say you're not profoundly uncomfortable. I think could also be interpreted as a relative absence of this experience of separation. But and like the ability to direct attention towards sensation, particularly the touch sensation that would seem to indicate the boundaries of one's body, which is something that can that can happen even in discomfort, even in pain, even in painful or uncomfortable, whether physical or emotional pain or discomfort. Like attention can go into that and in a way kind of go through it, and it's possible, I'm saying, to perceive what would seem to automatically indicate separation. It's possible to perceive as also the connection. Like the apparent boundary is also the site of connection and a site of transference of, what would be matter or energy. It's kind of like, I don't know, like where the bodily fluids in some sense are avoided, where there's, because they can represent a threat to the integrity of the corpus. Poo-poo, pee-pee, blood, etc. Representing like the breach of the boundary, representing the the continuity, and it's like the breach of the boundary, but it's also a continuity between the self and the world. But also, all like forms of suffering. Suffering representing a threat to the integrity of some kind of some individual. And I'm sort of saying that it's possible. It's possible to understand suffering as also a site of connection and site of the site of transference. The site of communication between self and other. Just, I don't know, maybe not so much, because I guess when it's like interpreted that way, maybe it's not even experienced as suffering so much. And so like when it is experienced as suffering, maybe that's kind of inherently impossible, or like definitionally impossible. Maybe it's like the experience of suffering perhaps is kind of like definitionally the experience of separation in a negative way, the negative aspect of separation, in which there is a threat to integrity, threat to the continuity of the subject who is suffering. But I don't wish to impose any kind of moral direction here, nor offer any kind of I don't wish to offer any kind of like comforting rationale for suffering, like for you or for another. But at the same time, it's like for instance, in a very mild way, it's like that's how I'm understanding, for instance, the relatively mild emotional discomfort and desperation experienced by me, say, at the beginning of this video. From the current perspective, like it is in fact viewed as the site of communication between like what I'm kind of conditionally calling that subjectivity, the identified individual who in that moment is like, what the fuck am I doing? I feel like an idiot, etc., etc. It's like the action of that. It's kind of like a very mild annihilation, if you will. Or like, it's like a mild, well, I mean, the degree is not that important, but it's some kind of dissipation of the boundary that held that individual from the world. And not that there's not just like different boundaries always seeming to arise, and not that there's not always individuation seeming to arise, like as this like always this ever-present potentiality for individuation to arise as a process, and the appearance of solidity of self and reality is like this ever-present potentiality. But it's a problem and it's not a problem. Like I said before, there's no end, you know, there is no salvation. I mean, you can think about death, if you want, you can think about death as like finally resting, and relatively speaking, that makes perfect sense if you if you consider that death is the inevitable disintegration of anything that would uphold the experience of continuity of self. Like, it's, you know, the utter annihilation of anything like that. Any like persisting trace of identity. But it doesn't change, it doesn't, you know, fundamentally change the nature of reality. And in fact, it's like there essentially is no death, because every moment is death, you know? It's like every moment, but in as far as I say every moment is death, it's like equally true that every moment is birth. And, you know, it's like as continuous as anything gets. Like birth, death, and even the passage of a moment being essentially the same thing, being essentially just like shapes of nothingness. where it's like anything like cessation is also necessarily the cessation of anything ever having been, you know? A cessation of the individual is a cessation of the individual ever having been, ever having a past or a history. And it's like it's maybe easy to misinterpret what's being said here as being kind of like a false, like the type of falsehood that is saying that like the cessation of one individual alters the objective world. That is to say that, like, that, which is kind of like, that's still kind of framing this in the sort of conventional worldview of there existing multiple subjectivities within one objective world, which, you know, I'll admit is I'll admit that that's kind of a worldview that's hard to escape or hard to get around, hard to see beyond. It's hard to avoid that as kind of like this conceptual basis of reality. But let's maybe put it this way. If we, let's say that, let's look at, for instance, some worldview that is obviously wrong to us, and, you know, take your pick. Like take your pick of whatever worldview seems obviously wrong to you, but that yet is held by someone or some people, or was held. And so, like, let's take for an example like monotheistic creationism, and we kind of view this as this medieval worldview that came about in conjunction with a new social arrangement that is of, you know, like a very intense top-down hierarchy and monarchy, basically, where the world is so because God made it that way, and things happen because God made it that way. And, you know, this coming about when there are now monarchs, and things happen in your society and your economy because the king says it, and the king, you know, because the king decreed it so, and you do things because the king said so, and the king is the king because God made stuff the way it is, and you have to obey God, or, you know, suffer eternal hell. And if eternal suffering is, you know, too big a risk to doubt anything, because even doubting the existence of God will undoubtedly condemn you. to eternal suffering. And then, you know, we can say that from our perspective, that's obviously wrong based on all of the subsequent observation and of the world and scientific process, you know, based on observation, the rigorous like sorting out our observations of nature, of the world, and arriving at the understandings of reality that are most supported and predictive of, you know, the things that the observations that are in least contradiction with observation. And so we have what seems to be this much more powerful and clear and predictive and consistent scientific worldview that absolutely vitiates the idea of a human like creator God, and even can offer a very compelling explanation of why the monotheistic worldview would come into being in the first place. That is, we can offer all kinds of explanations as to how and why monotheistic religion would emerge and persist, you know, and offer those explanations in terms of the social sciences and economics and anthropology and so on, which are explanations that are more or less consistent with our other what's the word, kind of like rationalistic understanding of the world. And there seem to be relatively fewer contradictions in this scientific, rational network of understanding the world than, say, for instance, a creationist worldview, which particularly butts up against reality as many of us experience it. So this is just a long-winded laying out of an example of a worldview and how we seem to see very clearly its falsehood, and how we can seem to see the superiority of our own worldview as being more inclusive, being able to include more explanation and more observation, and be able to even be able to incorporate an explanation as to why others would have the opposing viewpoint. So, for instance, if you take any one of the creationist worldviews, for instance, Christianity, and then that worldview as time progressive, comes into increasing contact with equivalent but contradictory worldviews, for instance, Islam and Hinduism and Judaism, etc. These worldviews that are essentially like have the same basic structure, that is that, you know, a person, a human like God having created the world, and yet there are these different religions representing different gods, and so being fundamentally incompatible with each other. And so you have to then, if you're going to stick with Christianity, then you have to use the framework of Christianity in order to explain the existence of Muslims or the existence of anyone else who is not a Christian, and the way that that has resulted has either been it's either been like the denial of the right for any of those worldviews to exist outside of Christianity, and therefore the rationale behind great and widespread violence and domination, and coming from other religions too, the same thing happening. Or it necessitates a basically self-contradictory type of like liberal Christianity, in which you say, I'm a Christian, but these other people have a right to believe what they're right. So I'm a Christian, but the Muslims are allowed to believe in their God, and but it's inherently contradictory, because you're essentially saying I'm right, but it's also, my whole framework is, it's like you're effectively saying like that you're effectively saying I'm believing something, and I'm respecting the belief that what I believe is wrong or something. It's like you're not even saying that you're right, It's like you're kind of saying like, I'm just believing something because it's what I believe. I'm not saying I'm right, because that would necessitate, like saying that Christianity is true necessitates saying that all the Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus and everybody else is wrong, and that atheists are wrong, and that they're all going to hell. But you're saying I'm going to believe it anyway. So I'm just saying that as part of this example, there's an interpretation where, from the scientific rational point of view, there is at least exists within that worldview a relatively coherent explanation for the existence of many would-be contradictory worldviews, say the various monotheistic and other religions. Like you have something like anthropology that can kind of construct an understanding of these pluralistic, these multitudinous other worldviews within itself. And so in that sense, it's like the scientific rational viewpoint is able to transcend and include. And now I'm not actually, it doesn't actually like admit for room of these other viewpoints as being valid or true. You know, it's like a scientific rationalist is not saying that the creationist is, that their viewpoint is true, or like, you know, it's just, it's offering an explanation. And of course it's like, it's also inherently offering a type of hierarchy of truth. So what was I actually getting at? I was kind of like, what was I even getting at? Okay, so like, let's imagine a world pre-scientific rationalism, where it's like, a creationist worldview, or for example, like a geocentric worldview. So like, it's like there was at one point where the leading edge of anything resembling science pointed to Earth being the center of reality, and the stars being like little holes in a dome rotating around it or something. And this other idea, this idea of the Earth not being the center of the universe, and even the idea of the Earth rotating around the sun, just had not occurred to anybody. And it's like, why would it, you know? It's like you can see kind of an evolution of worldview going on there, I guess. That like, if there is going to be anything like knowledge, it's going to have this orientation, you know, and it generally has this orientation of increasing over time, you know. Like, we generally have this idea that our knowledge and our understanding increase and become closer to the truth as time moves forward. And how like, you know, the worldviews with the worldviews that increasingly contradict with observation get beaten down and become overcome by the worldviews that don't contradict observation. And this is, you know, this continual process where our best models of reality we do eventually find where they come into contradiction with observation, and are pressured to come up with a newer and better model of reality that contradicts less with observation. So I guess like the whole thing that I'm on, this whole train of thought is part of saying something about this idea of like progression of knowledge. And it's saying something about like saying something about the existence of like a perceived hierarchy of knowledge, where, for instance, like we just kind of laid out this way that there's knowledge that contradicts more or less with observation. But I guess what I'm saying, I guess that what I'm saying is like, something like that always is still a perspective, and it always is still a manifestation of this, what I'm calling this isomorphism between observer and the observed. And like sort of an example like that we've been talking about, it's like Copernicus comes on the scene at, the right time, where it's like, I forget, actually, like even in the history of science, I may be remembering this incorrectly, or maybe I'm not, but like that there was a time when this where the Copernican model, that namely that the Earth revolves around the sun and not the other way around, which is, a relative like great expansion of the understanding of reality. Like there was a time in history when that model was put forth, and it was completely beaten down and written off as being totally heretical. Like that, like it was essentially wrong in the hegemonic view, because it's like it completely threatened the, let's say, the hegemonic worldview, and like decentralized, it kind of like decentralized the core observer. It kind of has the effect of decentralizing humanity. The fact that the Earth is not the center, that what the thing that is home to everything that we can identify as subjectivity, even the full intersubjectivity that we view as the human race. Being decentered, that's like a major threat. Hello.
Hi.
And so that's like, it's at that time, it's effectively wrong. And then at some point, it's like Copernicus's model is kind of like starts to get accepted enough, and it stands up. It holds up to observation better than the previous Ptolemaic geocentrism, and gradually becomes the view, that the Earth revolves around the sun. even though it's like that even this whole process of actually trying to make observations correspond with each other in a conceptual worldview starts to have more and more friction with monotheism and creationism and its attendant social configuration of monarchy. And so, you know, it's like continually, it's like the powers that be exert their power to maintain the worldview that supports the continuity of that power. And so, like, it's like, I think that don't ever think that you're not doing that, you know? Like, I don't, you know, I'm trying, it's like I'm trying, but then it's like, I can also recognize the same thrust to maintain a sense of self, you know? And what do I have to maintain? What kind of worldview do I have? Am I like being sucked into maintaining in order to maintain my particular sense of self? So it's kind of in a relational sense, in a relative sense, that we can portend to have any kind of grasp on something called truth. And like, because we can say we can say that it's like let's say this. You can say, and I can say, that whatever our individual model of reality is, that we can say that as far as we're concerned, it's the most correct one that we know of, you know, that through it we observe the world and we observe other individuals, other subjectivities holding on to other worldviews that are similar or different. Hello.
Hi.
And as we go on moving through this world, we're either updating or not updating our worldview, or we are using its various conceptual apparati to make sense of what we observe in the world, and to make sense of how we view other individuals and other worldviews that differ from our own. And so, you know, it's either we're changing it or we're not, but either way, it's like we're effectively being like, you know, like this model of reality is so far the best thing that I have encountered to make sense of this experience of existence. And how and our that this worldview that we have, this, which is essentially the same thing as saying that, like, this perspective that we have, which is what makes us who we are, who we think we are, has to deal with other perspectives that contradict it. It has to deal with it one way or another. It has to because, like, the perspectives that contradict it have to be made wrong in some way. It has to be demonstrated how the like kind of truth accessing power of our worldview is able to overcome the equivalent apparatuses of an opposing worldview. You know, that's why we have to say, like, if we were an atheist scientific rationalist, that's how there are components of our understanding, our model of reality, that deal with opposing worldviews like creationism and so forth. That explain why and how it exists, and why and how it is not true, or it is how it is actually in conflict with reality. But if you consider the fact that not only every culture, but it's like every worldview does that same thing. Every worldview has its way of dealing with opposing ones, and has its way of maintaining its continuity, its integrity, of dealing with threats to itself.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Doing good?
And then, you know, consider that extends to every single individual, every single subjectivity, every single individual has a perspective, and I'm saying, like, that's definitionally so, that it's the same as saying every perspective is, you know, the same as individuation. Like, having perspective is identification. That without identification there's no perspective, and without perspective there's no identification. And consider that every single opposing worldview that, let's say, you would say is wrong, has its equivalent mechanisms for asserting that, in fact, that you are wrong, and it is, you know, as right as it can be, at least. That it is, you know, it's I'm saying that, like, the maintenance of a worldview is essentially the same as a maintenance of, say, an individual, because the conceptual framework through which one models an external reality is isomorphic to the conceptual model that models an interiority, a subject, an individual. And so worldviews both create the external world and create the individual. And each one has within it the ways that it deals with the phenomenon of intersubjectivity, of the encounters with the subject that is different from itself. And if, you know, I guess maybe the best that I can do as a perspective holder is at least attempt to court the consideration of all perspectives, of all perspectives. And the act of that I think is inherently, I guess I would say is inherently at least a little bit corrosive to us, to a certain type of like rigid individuation and like fierce adherence to knowledge, you know. Like this idea that every perspective contains a piece of the truth. That, or to take that further, that even the fact of a perspective, even the fact of a perspective manifesting in reality at all necessitates it being in some form a manifestation of reality. That being inherently containing of some piece of the truth, you know. And I can try and get into some examples later. And then, like, kind of to recognize the always partiality of the truth, the partialness of any truth, most importantly, one's own. And I guess I would say that in my experience, the only thing that's necessary to plainly expose the partiality of one's own truth is mere looking at it, mere observation of one's own truth, you know, giving it some attention, give it some space and some attention. To sit with your own, to sit with yourself and just look at what you think about reality. What is it? Who are you in it? What is the world to you? And look at it, and just kind of like see for yourself if you really ask yourself truthfully, does it even hold up to your own self-questioning? You know? Like, to ask yourself as honestly as you can, are there in fact contradictions between my observations of reality, that whether it be objective or subjective or both or neither, and the kind of model that I seem to be holding up of reality? And like, can you find the solid, firm ground of it, you know? And or like the question of does in fact the phenomenon of experience itself, just, you know, whatever is the most fundamental aspect of who you are, of experience, of like, I mean, and I'm just saying, like, the mere fact that it seems like we're experiencing something, that there is a phenomenon at all called experience. Hi. Or that we there is at least signified something called experience that you know, I would say would seem to be as fundamental as anything, that it would be effectively the substrate within which everything occurs. You know, whether it be objective or subjective, you know, that's all within this phenomenon called experience. And yet, that this very phenomenon that would apparently be so fundamental is itself not actually graspable. It's not locatable in space. It's like, you know, it's like it is meaningless. If you try to ask, okay, where is experience occurring? It's meaningless, because even the meaning of the question of where is something that is only given meaning by reference that are within experience, you know? It's like within experience that there is like an over there, or an in here, or you know, my own skull, or the place where I imagine my brain to be, versus the place where I see the tree ahead of me. Like, these are all the things that are necessary for something like locality to have any kind of meaning, and they are all within experience. And so if you try to ask yourself, okay, where is the experience occurring, it's meaningless, because it's like, essentially experience is all that there is, and like, look, like the question of where is something that's within that experience, you know? And the same with time. Like, it's like, okay, like when is experience, and ostensibly it's like the now, but then it's like, it's when you look into what now is, you find that it's in fact a blurry concept that is constructed in relation to concepts of the past and the future that are equally kind of projected out of our consciousness, as they're kind of like extensions of the would-be now, you know? It's like the now is a construct that we construct based on our idea of the past and the future, and it being this ostensibly this infinitely thin sliver of where present experience is occurring. Hi. And the past and future being these other times where now was and now will be, or that like experience was and experience will be, but that are not present now and effectively not even existent other than like the extent to which they exist within this thing we're calling experience. And so this may be being a somewhat jumbled and confusing way to say that time is within experience, not the other way around. Like to ask when is experience is as meaningless as asking where is experience, or like to ask like why am I here as opposed to over there? Why is my consciousness located in this body and not in that other person's body? Or, for instance, in that tree right there, is kind of the same as asking like, why is now and not then? Or like, why is the now? Why doesn't the sliver of now happen to fall in this particular moment when I happen to be alive and happen to be me, as opposed to somewhere else? So this is all kind of like another way of pointing to the isomorphism between self and other that is creating this feeling of centrality, of centeredness, of individuation. You know, like individuation meaning the experience that I am a person is the same as the experience of locality, that I am here and not there, and I am now and not then. And it's the same process that erects this image of the world as erects this image of self. That, and I'm sort of saying that, like, when you essentially turn attention back onto itself and ask and inquire into the nature of something like experience, experience being this signifier of something all encompassing, and that's how I'm kind of defining it, as experience encompassing anything that falls within it, including what we observe, what we sense, our thoughts, our conceptions, anything in objectivity or subjectivity being including in experience as I'm defining it here. And it's like, kind of like logically, why wouldn't you ask this like larger question of, to me that seems like the fundamental place to look if you were looking for something like truth, or looking to, it's essentially the same as asking like, what is reality? And I guess to me, for some reason, it's like, it just seems so natural to ask that kind of question. And yet, when you ask it, you can't get a meaningful answer, because the scope of the subject matter that you're inquiring about is larger than meaning itself. It's larger than either subjectivity or objectivity. It's so large that there can't be a two, you know? And so you cannot answer it or grasp it or hold it with anything resembling meaning. And that's where, you know, you just reside in paradox. Good, how are you? I feel like as if I've rambled a little bit, as if there was maybe starting to develop an overarching structure that I'm trying to remain cognizant of. And I think what needs to be drawn together now is this kind of this understanding of what individuation is, like this action of separation into subjective and objective. How in a way, I think that I think that to honestly embrace that does in fact annihilate any hierarchy of knowledge in any kind of ultimate sense. That hierarchy of knowledge or of truth or of morality can only subsequently be understood as existing in relation to something, you know, as existing in relativistic terms. But I want to be cautious here because there's this risk of merely accepting that as an intellectual truth and then utilizing it or weaponizing it in order to assert one's perspective over other perspectives. That is, you harden off this like more expansive and like kind of dissipative orientation towards knowledge. You harden that off into like a hard truth of relativism that you then use to delegitimize other perspectives in order to forward your own perspective, especially that perspective of relativism. Like relativism now as a solid truth that wants to dominate, and it dominates by decrying all other perspectives as being false, as being wrong, as being products of patriarchy or whatever it is, But the only actual true spirit of that relativism is to continually apply it to itself. Like that is essentially, oh hey little toad. So the potential risky paradox of that relativism being that it weaponizes itself against every viewpoint except its own. It kind of magically forgets to look at itself. And then what it becomes is another individuated perspective that has this like life drive to maintain itself against anything that's perceived as a threat to it, and then it becomes intolerant, and that's kind of like the gravity to any perspective, the gravity of any perspective, and that being one and the same with individuation is this need to perpetuate oneself, to defend oneself, to defend the integrity of your existence and defend the perceived continuity of your perspective. That is the same as saying like the perceived necessity of defending the limitedness, of defending your own limitation. There is the constant gravitation towards that, which is nothing other than manifestation itself. It's nothing other than the manifold. It's nothing other than the void manifesting in the manifold, the one expressing as the many. And in that respect, is just as natural as anything. That, you know, competing viewpoints, contradiction, disagreement is just as natural as the void expressing itself as the many. And so it's like at the same time, everything is a problem and everything is limited and everything is a partiality of the truth. Everything is a partial truth. And then at the same time, on the same token, it's like not a problem. It's like not a problem in that everything is a partial truth, you know? It's like the partiality of everything is at the same time that which separates and that which unites. And that there's not actually a real dichotomy between separation and unity. That the two poles necessitate each other. And I feel like there's essentially, or that there's potentially not essentially, like an analogy to be drawn from this in, let's say, geopolitics currently, of there appearing to be this like multipolar world with, like, you know, however I try to characterize either of the poles is going to be completely loaded and controversial, but, you know, ostensibly democracy on one pole and ostensibly dictatorship or I don't know if totalitarianism is quite, or might be too extreme. I don't know. Like I said, anything that I'm going to say is going to be wrong in some way. But I want to say something like, to the extent that one pole of a duality is going to attempt to dominate its other pole or destroy its other pole, in the act of doing so, it becomes its other pole, you know? It becomes what it is trying to rid itself from. Like if scientific materialism was on a trajectory to eliminate the subjective from the model of reality, to eliminate the consciousness, you know, to model all of reality in terms of the material. that is independent of the subject. And then we see that, lo and behold, at the very core of objectivity, that is when we get into the most rigorously scientific metaphysics, then we find that we've come full circle back into subjectivity as this thing that we this phenomenon that we can't escape and that we can't explain in terms of materialism. And so I'm just kind of drawing from this a type of intuition that could potentially be useful, that would lead me to ask if I, for instance, found myself desiring to rid the world of a particular type of power or force or entity that I considered a fundamental threat to my own existence, then the intuition as formed by this particular processual metaphysics, if you will, would lead me to ask of myself, whether in the act of attempting to rid the world of this entity, am I in fact becoming that which I'm trying to rid the world of, you know? Just like to ask that, you know? Like, are there ways in which I'm enacting the thing that I'm rejecting in my act of rejecting it, you know? And I would say that to the extent that there appears to be any orientation of truth, I mean, and even I would say even to posit the existence of something like truth posits it as having an orientation of there being things that are relatively more true or relatively less true, you know, if we're to say that there's any such thing as truth at all, then it doesn't necessarily set up a type of hierarchy. And when I say hierarchy, it sounds loaded, like I'm saying it's a bad thing, but I'm not talking about hierarchy of domination or hierarchy of power. It can include a hierarchy of like explanatory power or of inclusiveness, you know, of like how Ken Wilber talks about holarchy, where, for instance, there is a hierarchy between atoms, molecules, and cells, in that molecules include atoms, include all the complexity of atoms, but atoms don't include atoms on their own don't include all the complexity of molecules, and a cell includes all the complexity of molecules and atoms, plus another level of complexity that is not included within molecules and atoms. So that being that kind of hierarchy, and that very much corresponding with the sort of relativistic hierarchy of worldviews that I was talking about earlier, where you can say in a relative way that scientific rationalism can contain within it a explanation of the complexity of monotheistic mythology, but that monotheistic theology in some ways, but then this falls apart because it's like monotheistic mythology would, it doesn't necessarily fall apart. It falls apart in the sense if you consider that monotheism would have an explanation for the encounter with scientific rationalism, as being, a creation of the devil, as being an evil trick, an evil illusion, and that's really the best that it can do. However, it cannot explain away the level of resolution at which scientific rationalism corresponds with observation and correlates observation and arranges observation, which is of a higher resolution than the monotheism can achieve. That is, through scientific rationalism, many more detailed observations can exist in harmony and accordance with the model of reality than can exist in harmony and accordance with the monotheistic model of reality. And in that sense, this holarchy stands true as a type of model of the relationship between those different, that would posit these as different levels of worldviews. Now I'm getting long-winded in kind of like illustrating a apparent direction that truth sets up, an orientation, this these various observable hierarchies that we can point to, in which, at least from our perspective, we can build this hierarchy or holarchy as a model of reality that has a direction, has a direction of transcendence, certain levels of the hierarchy or the holarchy transcend and include the other levels, like the molecule transcends and includes the atom, and the cell transcends and includes the molecule, and the multicellular organism transcends and includes the cell, and the corporal biological or like the conceptual mentation transcends and includes the biological substrate, if you will. But like all these particular levels and relationships are maybe a little subjective, and it doesn't really matter where you draw the particular lines so much as I'm trying to get across this general concept of a hierarchy of transcend and include, as is much more is expounded in much more detail by Ken Wilber, so you can read his books about it. But the point that I'm trying to get to is that if all these conceptions of reality, to the extent that that we adhere to them or use them or rely on them, which is a very great extent, like really, I think, for all of us, whether we really realize it or not, like constantly in the operation of life, we are making hierarchical distinctions between, say, different types of beings. Like, it's like we have a dog and we love the dog, and we would privilege the dog over the mouse that's in our house. It's like we're happy to swat the mosquito and extinguish its life, even though we recognize it as a being. But we would not do that to a dog, and we would much certainly not do it to a human. We respect a certain type of subjectivity of a dog, but we wouldn't give it the same license as the subjectivity of, for instance, an adult human. We wouldn't. It's very humorous to think about, but in actuality, we would never leave the important roles of society up to dogs. We wouldn't let the dogs drive the ambulance. We wouldn't let the dogs regulate our finance markets. We wouldn't elect the dogs to as lawmakers. We wouldn't trust the dog to perform surgery on us. I mean, maybe we can entertain such a concept in jest and amusement, but in actuality, it would be pure carnage. Pure carnage. It would be a horror show. I don't even want to think about dogs performing surgery. And so I'm just using this as an example to say that whether we agree with this intellectually or not, we do in fact abide by and behave by this understanding of a relative hierarchies of subjectivities. It's like you have a child and you understand, we take this understanding that a child has what we would conceive of as a less complex and less coherent understanding of the world as adults do, and accordingly we don't belie children with certain responsibilities, but we instead send them to school and we teach them things in order to help them navigate the world and help them navigate the experience of being a human, etc. And so, if, implicitly, by the very way that we go through life, this hierarchy of truth is implicit, is manifest or something, or like we implicitly behave as if there is something such a thing as truth and an orientation, then maybe the question is like, what is its telos? What is it? Does it have an ultimate point? Does it have a center? You know, it's like, it seems easier to identify its antithesis. You know, it seems it's easier to identify something that is a blatant lie, that is a blatant, you know, that's something that blatantly contradicts with observation, you know, than it is to identify the truth, you know, a perfect truth. And it's like, I think I would say, it seems to me like if there is something of a telos of consciousness, that it is something of a void, that like the center of truth, or the telos of truth, is something like a void that you can court, and you can in various ways attempt to defy gravity and kind of float into, and exist in this unstable state of groundlessness. And that it's possible to kind of like project from our perspective, from our limitation. It's possible to kind of project a picture, sort of like the best kind of picture we can make of this telos, of the void, or perfect truth, or perfect goodness, or perfect beauty, whatever it is, or like from a more theistic framework, God, but like, you know, God in really a more mystical sense than a human like God. Like God as it cannot be conceived of fully by a human, by a nature of the limitation of our human nature, but like being something that one can maybe not so much aspire to, but kind of like submit towards, or like have a practice of submitting towards, even if it can't be reached, you know. And I would suggest that practice, whatever it is, whatever form that it would take, is also a practice of like loosening of perspective, loosening of like the hard individuation that creates and maintains the experience of separation, the experience of two, even the experience of intersubjectivity, where it's like, it's not so much that you're perceiving this objective world in which multiple individuals, including myself, exist, and that and the accordant the resulting idea that we all exist somewhere on a hierarchy of being closer or farther away from the truth, but rather that it's rather that like that very experience is a manifestation of, I don't know, the limitedness or something like that, or like the recognition that individuation and the concordant othering of the rest of reality and the othering of the rest of subjectivities, othering subjectivities is what is it? I don't know. I'm kind of like unconsciously setting up another hierarchy here. You know, like if I'm trying to posit that manifestation of manifold identities as an aspect of limitation, which, you know, is also kind of contradictory, because it is already in fact just an aspect of perfect unity. It is in fact a manifestation of the void and the kind of just definitional reality that the void is a void, you know, that it doesn't exist, that it is a non-existence. And so it's like existence which requires duality being a necessary, in a way, being necessitated by the ultimate non-existence. It's fucked up, you know. It's like you can't get to it. You can't actually fucking get to it. And so it's kind of like with the recognition of the impossibility of like attaining the void or attaining perfect truth or attaining unity, like the recognition of just the definitional impossibility of that, that it's an oxymoron even to conceive of it, kind of howdy. Good. It's like it's kind of like if it is ultimately unattainable, then effectively nobody has a greater purchase on it, you know. Nobody's actually no individual is actually closer to it than another individual, because it's effectively infinitely far away. It's like if you it's this thing of like, if you're trying to count to infinity, no number is effectively no number is actually closer to infinity than another number. And I'm saying that that's how it goes with truth. That truth is ultimately an unattainable void, an absence of solidity, an absence of meaning, and that there is no it is an absence of individuation, and therefore it's like no individual is ever actually closer to it than another. You know, and I think it kind of makes sense. I think it makes sense, you know? And it's like at the same time, it's like the perception of another individual at all is kind of inherently locked up with perceiving yourself as an individual and isomorphic to it, and in the sense that it's not actually possible for you to perfectly know another person. It's not possible because you can only know another person in terms of yourself, you know? You can only kind of project your own subjectivity onto other subjectivities and kind of project this altered version of your own subjectivity that is somewhat similar and somewhat different from your own. And so like you have this task set before you to try to extend and expand your conception of what subjectivity can be, to try and bridge across to every other subjectivity that you perceive. And you know, it's like you succeed or fail to various extents, but to the extent that an other is an other, then you are not that other. To the extent that you don't perceive, you know, to the extent that you would know the other, you would effectively be the other, you know? And like this is how identification works. Like you identify with your family and your loved ones, yourself above all, you know, and then like the widening circle of empathy, you know, where it's like then your family and friends and your tribe and your whatever it is, ethnic group or ideological group or you know, affinity group, or people that you agree with in your modeling of reality, and people who you agree with in your modeling of others who are different. You know, you are essentially identifying with them. Like they're aspects of, they're also, they're just like extended aspects of yourself. So there's this whole spectrum between self and other. And, you know, it's like, you see that in effect where you feel bad for killing a dog. You might feel a little bit less bad for killing a cow to eat some meat. And you'd feel a little less bad for, I don't know, killing a fish. And you'd feel a little less bad for killing a fly. And you'd feel a little less bad for killing a virus. And you'd feel a little less bad for, breaking a rock, you know? Because, like, it's like, you know, virus, and then there's this fuzzy line between what we're considering animate or inanimate. Like it is like a virus being, like, just, like, a little bit more sophisticated than, in our eyes, than a chunk of RNA or a complicated molecule, you know? It's like, and then you encounter this fuzzy line where you're trying to discern, is there subjectivity there or not? Is there a potential for suffering there or not? Is there some form of consciousness there or not? And it's hard to deny that the line is fuzzy. It's hard to deny that there is effectively a spectrum of consciousness that we identify, and it's hard to deny that there's kind of a inherent hierarchy in the perception of consciousness that we ourselves are always at the top of, that we kind of naturally most readily identify the highest form of consciousness as that who we are, you know. And I think it kind of goes inherently, like even if you are in a concerted effort to transcend your self-centeredness or something, and you're in a concerted effort to like extend your circle of empathy greater and greater, which is all well and good, and I guess that's something that I guess I would say I'm trying to do as well. Then you're still kind of identifying with something broader, you know, identifying with something more broader and more complex and maybe harder to grasp, and so on and so forth. And maybe you were trying to, you know, maybe you recognize this fuzzy line, where you observe the absence of a hard line between what is conscious and what is not conscious. And maybe you observe the kind of inherently self-centeredness of even maintaining the model of what consciousness is, you know, that it's like not only in some ways inherently anthropocentric in that we are effectively like kind of mentally modeling like a modified version of human experience when we think about the subjectivity of other animals, and we kind of like recognize, you know, something like chimpanzees as being close to us and something like jellyfish as being a lot farther away from us. Hi.
Hey. Have a good day.
You too. And then maybe, you know, there's this observing at the same time that that it's that centeredness that sets up the hierarchy, that like that what we can perceive as a relatively complex subjectivity is in fact completely based on our own subjectivity, that which we set up as our own subjectivity, the which is, you know, is a construct, our own subjectivity, like that we are an individual that is perceiving the outside world, which we've kind of like demonstrated in various ways is all kind of like a interrelational web of phenomena that have no inherent existence. And so this concept of complexity and a concept of a conscious being, hello, in a sense is no more fundamental than its isomorphism to our own experience, and then recognizing that and realizing that the difference between a human and a mosquito doesn't have any hierarchy to it. Like the hierarchy is perceptual. That the difference between a mosquito and a human is an aspect of this activity of individuation that doesn't have a ground to it. And then for that matter, like the difference between the virus and the inanimate molecule, you look at that and understand that there's not a hard line between it, and that the difference is in fact kind of perceptual and relative and really just kind of almost arbitrarily based on a set of other conceptions of what we consider to be life and what we consider to be complex life, and which is, again, just kind of modeled after what we're perceiving as our selfhood, which, you look at selfhood and you come up empty, and you come up with the recognition that all the apparent complexity of your subjectivity, all the apparent complexity of your human experience, all the apparently richness of emotional and conceptual, intellectual, spiritual life is all of that is still all interrelational, which is to say that all that complexity is perceptual and based upon separations, of divisions, of making boundaries, of making distinctions between certain things and other. And if you start to really try to look at the big picture of it, of that complexity, and ask what it is, you kind of see that, like, the boundary of the boundary is zero. That, or to say it another way, that the sum of all knowledge is nothing. The sum of all knowledge is a void, is emptiness, is unknowing. Like the sum of, and also that, like, the sum of all the aspects that would seem to constitute the self is also essentially nothing when you, like, investigate each individual aspect of the self and realize that it doesn't have any inherent existence. And then you ask, like, is the sum of a bunch of zeros somehow not zero? It's like this it's like having the telos of truth, or having this that, like, the telos and truth, and the like a hierarchy between truth and hierarchy between complex versus simple, or valuable versus not valuable, or valuable life versus less valuable life, or inanimate matter being the least valuable, and setting up this problem of persisting as a species, the problem of sustainability. What are we going to sustain what has ever been sustained? Because at every, the illusion of the continuity through time is something that's thrown up every moment, and in fact is only thrown up, only being thrown up now. Or, that there isn't a now. That there's no problem for the future, because there isn't even a present. There isn't even a present that can be sustained. There never was a person to be sustained. But in that, you know, as an expression of that impossibility, here we are as a bunch of individuals with big problems. And that's, you know, a problem, and it's not. Or the supposed telos of all things, the apparent good, is actually the same as the antithesis, or the like apex of evil is the same as the apex of good. The you know, it's like the summation of all evil equates to annihilation. You know, like total annihilation of anything that we hold to exist. You know, the annihilation of that which we hold to, which we value, and that which we value being an extension, you know, being this isomorphic image of what we think we are, this being that has a motivation, this being that has an axe to grind, this being that needs to continue. And yet so, you know, annihilation of that, annihilation of complex subjectivity, and go further, and, you know, the annihilation of life on the planet as being the ultimate definition of evil, the annihilation of life at all, because it's essentially the annihilation of subjectivity. Yet, at the same time, if we look at the telos of all that we hold to be good, true, and beautiful, it's a similar kind of annihilation. Hello. Because it is cessation of the separation of the subject and object, and as we can understand and not understand, that's also the cessation of reality. You know, so it's like, you know, there being this apparent difference in spectrum between good and evil, but no, it's actually a full cycle, and it's like kind of just apparent that we are sort of suspended between those two poles, having to navigate between them, and it being this constant problem, you know, the problem of evil, you know, it's just there. It's the problem of evil is the same as the problem of good. Because they're both at the ends of either pole. They're at the same place. And so it's like, I don't know, in some ways, it's like, it's as if the more that understanding is present, the less there appears to be a great need to do anything extreme in either direction. Because, I mean, think about it. Like, if you observe something like an extreme action that you perceive to be evil, is it ever the case that the person doing it or the entity enacting it is perceiving itself to be evil or doing something evil. No, it's the opposite. It's the entity perpetrating whatever it is believes itself to be doing something very good, to be, you know, doing the best thing it can do. You know, that's why I say the problem of evil is also the problem of good. I don't know. And I can't, there's not, it's not like I can draw any specific directives from that. It can't be done. You can't draw any specific directives from that. There's no direction. There is no direction. And it's not, it's neither is it a call for stasis or inaction, because, like, you know, inaction is action in itself. There's no actual stasis possible. It's like you still just go ahead and live, you know, and doing things, and there being change and instability and making decisions, you know, as all just a natural thing. And then, you know, there being simultaneously no direction and at any given time a relative direction that's as real as anything, which is not real at all. Like a good to do. I can imagine how many times I thought to myself, damn, I need to do a good thing. I need to be a better person, and I need to do a thing. So I do a thing that appears like a good thing to do, and then often, almost as soon as I do it, or shortly thereafter, I come to a different understanding that vitiates the goodness of that thing, you know, that vitiates the goodness of that action, and I just then perceive it as, oh, that was an action, you know, it wasn't good, it's just a thing that I did, or a thing that, you know, was done. Hello.
Hey.
Damn, I can't believe how quick time has flown. We're almost at the end. I can't believe it. I was like thinking to myself there'd still be another like 2 hours or an hour and a half or something, and we're almost done. That's crazy. What is going on? And yet I still feel as if the apparent structure of what I've been saying is left unresolved. But that would kind of seem to kind of be fitting with the spirit of the content of whatever is coming out of my mouth. You know, it's still like this is like whatever this experience whatever this experience seems to be, it's going away as we speak. To whatever extent it would seem as if there's some kind of truth being expressed here, it's vanishing, you know, right now. We haven't gone anywhere, you know? We're still where we started, which is inescapably aspects of the void, and inescapably perpetually courting the void and courting wholeness and completeness, and we're kind of perfectly incomplete as expressions of the incompleteness of reality, and or you know that's not good or bad, it's just the way that it is, or it isn't, you know. That's the way that things aren't. And, you know, we're not any closer towards infinity, because you can't, than we were before, you know? And we're not any closer towards infinity than anybody else. You can't get closer, you know? Everybody is equally as far from infinity as anybody else. And anybody is as equally far from the truth as anybody else, because, you know, you cannot get to the truth. So, you know, let's try and come off it, if we will, but we can't, you know. You can't actually come off it. You're always on it. Or you're never on it, or something. No analogy really works. There's no salvation, because, you know. But then again, there's only salvation. Whatever. I'm ready for some perceived change, you know. I'm ready for some perceived distraction. I'm ready for an objective to manifest into my reality, to manifest me into a seeking individual towards some object, namely a motherfucking chocolate-coated protein bar. You know, I'm just ready, you know, for that to manifest as an external reality that has its isomorphic relation to the hunger inside me that needs to seek consummation. You know, to throw up this perceptual goal, and along with it the illusion of time and distance. How far away and how long away am I towards experiencing that sweet pleasure of dissipating the disequilibrium of my desire, to merge with the object of my desire, quite literally. Anyhow, this is all bullshit. This is all poison for your mind. Get rid of it. Get rid of me. Get rid of me. Get rid of me. And give me lots of money on Patreon. Why don't you? Link in the description. Bye.